Okay, so now we've done that, if we actually compile again, I'm surprised it's not done that. I was half expecting this to flag up to say that it's private, but it's not done that. Either way, we want to destroy that and want to use the get GUID function. I'm actually going to go ahead and make that pure as well. It's just a get function. Okay, so now we've done that, we can kind of start building the data that needs to be saved. So again, in the world item manager, so in the handle save request function, I'm going to add a local variable, and I'm going to call this one world item data. And for the variable type, I want to go for a GUID, and we want to set that to a map. And for the value, we want it to be that struct, that world item data struct that we created. So on the loop, we essentially want to add a new entry to this for each of the world items that we find. So we can connect the GUID to the top, so that'll be the key. And we do need to make this structure here. So we can connect the world item class, we can connect the item base class, and then the last thing we do need to connect in a second is the serialized data. Now, this here is a function that's got exec pins, so it does need to be a part of the exec path. Now, we could, if we wanted to, convert it to a pure function, but in this particular instance, I kind of avoid not doing so, purely because sometimes you may need to do additional logic in here to actually build your serialized data. So ideally, once it's done that once, for that particular call, ideally we want it to be cached. So that's kind of what we do here. So it kind of forces it to be cached in a sense. If you feel that you're happy to kind of manage that yourself, by all means go ahead and set that as a pure function, and you won't need to worry about it being as a part of the execution path. Okay, so we are getting there. Let's do a little bit of tidying here. I'm not fully happy with the pins there, but I think it's probably going to be the best we're going to get. Okay, so in this particular instance, it's going to go through, loop through all the items, and essentially build the data that we want to save. So as a reminder though, with the get serialized data, this is already handled in the world item, so not the world item, the item base, and any subsequent children that has data that needs saving. Now, the next thing that we need to do is actually check so slot exists. So it does say slot exists, so we can kind of do that on the completed. Actually, do we need to do that? No, we don't. We can just go straight into the save game slot, although we do need to create a save game object first. And this needs to be of our world data. And what we need to do is, oh, did we add that in there? No, we did not add it in there. So what we need to do now is essentially add the data that we've generated in here and actually pass it into the save game object we create. So before we can do that, we do need to actually include the data. So because we've already got it set up here, I'm just going to copy the variable and I'm just going to paste that over to here. So that just makes sure it's got the same structure. So as a reminder, that's a GUID and it's the world item data struct. Once we've done that, we can just set the world item data and we can set that to our local variable data that we've collected or assembled, however you want to think of it. And then once we've done that, we can do the save game to slot. like so. Now, the last thing we kind of need to do is handle the slot name, essentially. So, as a reminder, the current save slot that gets passed in here is what's stored in the game states, the current save slot. And we kind of want to treat that, as I mentioned, as kind of like the folder. So if we get the current save slot, we can then append whatever we want on there. So if we want to stick it in another folder, we can do. But for this, I'm just going to call this one world data. And we can just plug that into there. And again, we do have the return value on the save game 2 slot, so we could always include some additional debug off of there if we wanted to. Okay, so in terms of everything that's gone off so far, well, everything we have so far, as far as I'm aware, we should get all the saved data. Now, just as a reminder, because of the way that we're doing the save here, we don't have a persistent save game object, so we always create a new one and then we populate it with all the data we need at that particular point. This does mean that it will always get overridden with the new set of data. Right, so let's see if we can actually test at least the saving portion, and then we can kind of move on to the loading stuff. So what I'm going to do in here, so this is the third person character. I'm just going to add a debug key. I'm going to do num0. When it's pressed, I'm going to get the game instance. We need to cast to the specific type, and I'm going to do the request save. Okay, so coming in. So I have just done a quick save, so let's open up the saves folder. So as you can see, we do have a folder now called GameSave01, and if we open that up, we have the world data in there. Now, if we do actually open it up, I'm going to do it in Notepad++. You can actually sort of see it in this garbled gibberish. So we have the kind of the world class here. It's denoting it's a soft object property. The class here. So we can see that one of them was a health potion. And we get some of the additional data as well, like the quantity and the value. So it does look like it is saving in here, which is great. Now, what we want to do now is going back to the world item manager. We kind of need to handle when things are being loaded. So I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this one handle load request. I have just copied this from the previous function. So in this particular case, what we need to do is check to see, does a saved game exist? We do need to do something with a slot name, which we'll do in a second. So if it does exist, then we need to do something. If it doesn't, then there isn't actually anything we need to do in this particular case, because we can kind of assume that if there's no saved data for a particular level, then it's kind of like the first instance. So everything should already be set up based how it is in the editor, which in most cases is how you want it. If there are additional things that you want to do, you can always do it off of here. I know some individuals like to create a save game object create a save with all the data in it from the start of the game if one doesn't exist. It's up to yourself whether or not you want to do that. In this particular example, I'm not going to. I'm just going to ignore if one doesn't exist. And the reason why is because it can be quite useful when you're testing, because if you're making changes and you just decide not to save, when you jump back in, it'll be like it's a fresh game again, because there's no data that's been loaded. Now, if it does exist, we can actually go ahead and load the save game from slot. And you're probably starting to notice here, there's quite a few places where we do need to get the saved data. So what we are going to do in a second is actually create a function to help handle that, just to make sure that we are consistently getting the correct data that we need and saving it to the correct slot. But we'll come back to that in a second. So when we actually load the game from slot, we can go ahead and cast to the SGO world data. So this allows us to get that specific world item data from there. So now we've done that, we kind of have two things that we need to do. We need to check the current items in the world to see whether or not their GUID exists in this list. If it does, we don't need to do anything. If it doesn't exist in this list, we need to destroy the world item because it's no longer being used. It's no longer applicable. On top of that, what we then also need to do is look at any remaining items in this list that aren't currently present in the world, and then spawn them in, create the relevant data, and pass it to it. Now we may need to make some changes to how creating the item object is handled, but we'll be able to handle that in a second. Okay, so again, this is one of those sort of instances where we do need to get all the world items because we need to check them all. So we can go ahead and just use the get all access of class. And we can do a for each loop. Is there an option to remove? Yep. So we can get the GUID from the world item, and we want to check if it's contained in this list. If the answer is false, we want to destroy the actor. Let's try and do some tidying. I'm just going to convert this to a local variable. I'm just going to call this one loop actor. Actually, I'll click loop world item. There we go. Just to help make things easy to read. And we'll pop that over to here. Again, just helps cut down on some of the crossing lines. Now, regardless of what happens, the data that we've loaded, actually, what we'll do, I'm actually going to save this in a local variable as well. And we'll set that. That's just going to make it a little bit easier, well, a little bit cleaner just to arrange this. Tidy up this end. Okay, so yes, quick run through that again. So we got all the world items, we loop through them all. We then check to see if the GUID for that specific world item is in the save data. If it is, we don't need to do anything. If it's not, we need to destroy it. Once we've done that, we will always need to then remove the GUID from our world items list. And just as a reminder, that is just a copy that we have here, so that's the local variable version. So that way, by the time we finish looping through this list, the only ones left in it should be the ones that we need to spawn in. So these are the ones that were created at runtime. So for that, we can simply come in, get the keys, do a for loop. We can connect that straight onto the completed. And then we can do a spawn actor of class. And what we want to do, again with this, we can then find a particular value. If we split that, we can get the world item class, although we do need to load it. So I'm just going to do the asset blocking. Like so. Now, as a reminder, when you do load assets, in a lot of cases this will always be just a standard object class, so we do need to cast that to our world item base in this particular example. And the reason why is because that's all it can ever be anyway, but it does mean that when we plug that into the spawn actor, it does give us the basic variables that we have. And I have just realised that there is some data we are missing, and we'll see if you can figure it out before I get to it. So what we now need to do, you can see we've got access to these information here, so the GUID and things like that. So what we do need to do first though is actually create the item object that we're going to pass to this. So we can construct, well, let's start by loading the class, shall we? So cast, and I've got to the item base, like so, and then we can construct. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do this as a sequence. So we need to do the construct the item first, and then we spawn the actor. Like so, once we have spawned the actor, we need to apply serialized data, and we can pass the item data in that we get from our world item data that we've saved. Just a little bit of tidying. Okay, so over here I do want to just save this into a local variable. So this is the constructed item base. We'll just call that item. Just like so. Then we can just connect that to the item object on the spawn actor class. The next thing we do need to do is actually connect to the GUID up to the GUID over here as well. Just like so. So that way it means that when we spawn this actor back in, it's going to have the same GUID that we expect it to have. So that's going to keep the data consistent. Okay, so now the last thing we kind of need to do is actually set up its spawn transform. And some of you may have noticed that we've not actually stored that data, and you are absolutely correct. Before we do that though, what we can do, the collision handling, we want to set that to always spawn, so it just ignores collision. Now this is quite important to ensure that things end up back exactly where they were. If you really wanted to, you could always try to adjust location but always spawn option. Results may vary, but generally you want to make sure that it is always spawning regardless. Okay, yeah, so the last thing we need to do is actually sort out the location, because we never set that to save. So we need to come back to the handle save one, and we need to add in to our struct that we have here. So this is the world item data. This is going to be the transform. So item transform. So all of these should update to include one. Yeah, lovely. And then the world manager, yeah, so you see that pop up on there. So for this, we just want to get the actor transform. And we want to connect that up like so. So if we go back to the handle load, we should see that pin there now. and we can just connect that up onto the spawn transform of the spawn actor node. Like so. Now, in terms of the core logic for the loading, that should be handled. All we need to do now is just decide how we're going to handle the slot name. So if you remember with when we do the handle save request, we pass the current save slot through. Whereas when we're handling the load, it tends to be a little bit more tricky because we kind of, yeah, there's probably more places that you may want to load data than potentially save. In a lot of cases, it tends to be when something is first started. So like here, for example, on begin play. In addition, though, you may also want to handle the load on request. So I'm just thinking, yeah, so what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to do a request load on here. So this is in the game instance. We're going to do request load, so that's another function. And we're going to kind of set it up similar to the request save. So we do then need the on load requested as well. So we've added the additional event dispatcher, so we just need to call that. Again, with the request load, it works similarly. So if you call the request load function, if you don't specify a desired save slot, then it'll just use the current one that's been set in the game instance. If you do set one, then it'll update it to use that one instead. So now we've done that, we kind of need to bind to that one as well. To onload requested. So let's actually add, so on the handle load requested in the world item manager, we're going to add a new input to that for string. The reason why is because when we come back to the main event graph and we create that binding, we create event and it should then appear in the list. If the inputs on the function don't match the event dispatcher, it won't show up in this list. Okay, so now we've done that, we do have access to the prefix, so in this case the folder for the save. So I guess the last thing I kind of want to do is I'm going to create a function called build slot string. And I'm going to make that a pure function as well. The input there I've renamed to prefix, and we're just going to append world data to the end of it. If you're wanting to do something a little bit more complex in terms of your folder structures, you can do that here. An alternative option as well that I find works quite well sometimes is to actually just use gameplay tags. So you can kind of use the gameplay tags to determine the folders and things like that, and then you just append a particular name for the file at the end of it. Okay, so at the moment I'm just updating this here, so it's calling the relevant things. And I'm just going to update it on here as well, inside the handle save request. That's just to make sure that it's using the build slot string function. So that way, if we ever want to change how the string is built, we can just update it in this function. Okay, so load request. So that should all be good. As far as I can see, that should be good to go. Yeah, and just as a reminder as well, again, we don't actually store the save game object, so once it's finished this particular tick, it'll open it up to garbage collection, whenever that is. So any of the data that's stored in there won't persist. Okay, so we should be in a position where we can sort of save. So what I'm actually going to do, yeah, so on the third person, I'm going to do a debug key num1, and again we're just going to get the game instance, and we're going to do the request load. Again, I'm just going to leave it blank for now. Okay, so at the moment nothing's going to happen, but if we pick some of these items up, and I'm going to do one, sorry, I think I messed up on those debug keys there. 1 second. I think debug key 1's already being used by something else. Yeah, so it looks like we'd use that for some damage stuff. So I'm just going to remove that. It was only there for as an example. Okay, so let's try that again. So if we come in and we pick up some items, we then save, we close out and come back in, they should all still be there, but if we press 1, you'll notice they're no longer there. And the reason why is because they're in our inventory. So in this particular example, okay, so it looks like we do have some issues there, but I'll sort those out in a second. So it may be a case that what you actually want to do is request a load quite early on. So it's difficult to know exactly when you should request the load, because you kind of need to make sure that all the actors and all the other components and stuff have loaded and things like that. And sometimes some of their logic may need to be changed, and the order things get done in may change slightly depending on the data essentially. So what I'm going to do, just for this example, I'm just going to have it call the function up here. So once we've bound to it, I'm just going to call it. So that way it should do it as soon as we load into the level, like so. So again, if we pick these up, save, close out, and relog back in, the items are no longer there because they're all in my inventory. Okay, so last thing we need to do is just sort out these particular error messages. So we do have turned out to access world item from an array, BP world item is not valid. Okay, remove. Double check. Okay, so it looks like there seems to be an issue there with it not finding it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to swap the sequences around. So regardless, it's going to remove the item first from here. Because either way it's handled, but we do store the actor ref here. And we'll see if that solves the problem. There we go. Yes, it looks like destroying the item first kind of confused it. So even though we're not specifically referencing the actor per se, apparently it does something in the remove function for the map. So we'll remove it first, and then we seem to be okay. Okay then, so kind of a little bit of wrap up I want to kind of do. So since we initially set up the infantry system, we do now have or the saving on the inventory system, we do now have these event dispatchers here. So ideally, what we actually want to do is set the inventory system up to actually bind to that as well. So that's what we're going to do here. So it's going to be similar to how we do it over here. So we'll probably just copy that. And you'll notice that we have the load data function there. So let's move that out of the way. Now, in this particular example, we may actually see one of the minor problems that I sometimes talk about in terms of the load order. So, in essence, what we're doing here, oh yeah, I do need to handle those functions. So we do have the load data and the save data. I am just going to add an input to both of these. There's the string. Save slot and the save data. That's so. And then that should allow me to select these. So save data and load data. I'm just going to call those functions respectively. Anyway, now one of the issues that I sometimes talk about is in terms of the load order. So what's going to happen is when the world item manager loads and it's finished loading, it's going to come through, it's going to do all its bindings, and then it's going to do the request load. Now, when it comes to this request load, it doesn't actually know whether or not everything else has finished loading yet. So what could end up happening is this could do its thing, call request load, and then when it comes to the inventory system, it's not bound to that event yet, which means it never receives a signal to load its data because it hasn't been loaded. Now, of course, we could just, as we do in here, do the request load again, but then that means that the world item manager is going to try and load its stuff again. So we kind of end up in this sort of situation where everything's trying to do its own thing and they've got no idea what's going on. So we kind of need to centralize some of the logic almost. So for this request load, I'm actually just going to remove it from the world item manager altogether. Just because ideally we don't really want it there. So we'll come back to places we can potentially call that in a moment. So what I kind of want to do first is actually update what we're doing here. So at the moment we kind of get the, for the save slot, we just get the GUID and then we add inf underscore to it. But ideally what we need is an actual input so we can pass in the desired save slot. So as a reminder, that is the folder. Now just to make that clear, I'm just going to use two appends. And we'll call that prefix. So you'll probably notice this is very similar to what we did in the world item with the build slot string. For some of these sorts of things, it can be quite beneficial to create something like a function library that kind of helps you do some of this stuff. So that's done in the load one, so we've got to do the same for the save. Like so. Now, the last thing we kind of need to do is, if you remember in the previous episode, we actually went through and we did some stuff in terms of saving stuff in various places. So we kind of need to remove that. So we want to remove it on the drop item, which is where we popped it there. Trying to remember where the other places were. I can't remember if they were in the UI or not. So I believe there was one in the container. So on the widget close, I believe it was. Yep, so we're going to remove that there as well. And I believe there was another place, not that I can remember where. So let's go ahead and do a find references. Ah yes, it was on the key down. So we're going to remove those from the widgets as well. Again, this is just because it's no longer needed where it's placed. We just placed it in a few places just to help us test and do some debugging. Okay, so those places are now gone. So the only way that the save data would be called in most cases, technically it can still be called, but the preferred way to call a save is through the game instance by calling the request save function. You could always, if you wanted to, make some of these functions private, so that way they only ever get called through the these event dispatchers. Again, it's completely up to you how you want to handle that. Okay, so now we've done that, we kind of do need to think of a few things in terms of how we load them. Now, one example is on the player. We could stick something on begin play there, possibly add a tick or two delay, and then we do it. That can sometimes work. Another option is to actually use the level blueprint. Again, I don't use it very often, but if we open up the level blueprint, there is normally something on here for when it's loaded. I can't remember if it's this one. So begin playing the level, so we get the game instance. Just request a load. Let's see if that does its thing. It doesn't seem like it. Okay, so it does seem we're having a few issues there. It could be that that's possibly being called a little bit too soon. So let's try doing a delay until next tick. Okay, so it looks like that seems to be working now. In terms of the world items, they're not loading. However, in terms of the actual inventories, we've changed where they save, which means that data no longer exists. So what we can actually do is we can come in to the saved folder, so the save games, and we can just delete the data. If you're using folders, this is quite nice because you can have multiple saves essentially. So sometimes you can quite easily just delete an entire folder for a specific save. So now if we, with it deleted, if we come in and check, we find that it's still, it's missing all the data. So that's something that we do need to address, although the desired items in here has disappeared. That is possibly the reason why. Okay, so it looks like it's just the desired items had cleared for some reason on the inventory system. So let's just add some of these in. 7. Let's track it now. There we go, so that seems to be working. Save some of these. 0 to save. Load back in. And none of the items are there anymore. Okay. So that is interesting. Do we have all the save data in here? So we do have something in here. Okay, so something's set to 0. I could assume that's the player. No. So that must be this one, yeah. So again, we just want to generate a GUID. As I mentioned, you probably want to set something up similar to how we did on here with just the generate button, and actually set it so the GUID is unchangeable. So again, you don't want to be able to accidentally change that. Okay, so it does look like for some reason the world items aren't quite loading correctly. So we want to check that in a second. So I'm just going to add a print string over here to the load game from slot. So when we first come in, it doesn't exist, so it's not going to be there. Now I have saved, so if we load back up, we do get just jump straight to here, so we get the in there for the world data, and then we can step through. So it's showing there's 3 of the items in there. Step through again. All of the items there. Going through the loop. Okay, so that's it for this particular part. Let's just string the 3rd one, string the 4th one. Okay. It's got some numpty. So we actually remove the item and then we check if it's still in there. So it's never going to be in. So what we actually need to do is just store this into a local variable. So should destroy. And we'll set that before we do the remove. Like so. And then for the branch, we just check that variable there instead. So you'll probably notice here that it seems like nothing's working and everything's broken, but it's just a single thing. All the data itself is saving correctly, so there's no issue there. So it's just a case of making sure that we are loading it correctly. So I'm just going to toggle that breakpoint and just play. That seems to be working again. So let's see if it's just the ball that we get left when we go back in. There we go, and double check this is working again. So we'll leave just the cone in there. Save and reload. Yep. Hello, so it's Michael here from the future, and during the editing process I realised that I'd actually missed something, which is quite important. So here we are, I'm going to go over it now. Now, just to show you what the issue is, I have just cleared the saved folder, so there's no saved data at the moment. And what I'm going to do is do a quick test. You notice the items, they drop and they're moving about. And just notice where the ball is at the bottom there on the ramp. So I'm just going to save, so I should press 0, and then I'm going to reload. And you'll notice that the items aren't in the same place that they were when I saved. So this is actually kind of the problem that, well, it's the thing that I missed. So if we go into the World Item Manager, inside the handle load request, we do some stuff here where we check to see if we have any data for that particular item. And if we don't, we destroy the world item. Now this bit, that bit's fine. However, we don't handle what we do if the world item does have data. So if the item's moved or anything like that, we kind of have to go through and still update it because it's moved. At the moment, because we don't handle that, it just keeps it in exactly the same position as it is when, as you place it in the editor. Now, as a part of this, we probably want to make a few additional changes to kind of help us deal with that. And a part of that is actually this remove section here. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, we were initially calling this last, and generally that is something that we do need to do. However, there's a few other things we kind of need to deal with first as well. So at the moment, we kind of loop through the list in a normal order, but if we actually destroy the actor, that can sometimes cause problems in terms of how we're getting things from there. So because of the way Unreal kind of handles actors, and particularly destroying them, you might not necessarily get any problems per se just keeping it as a for each loop. But instead, what we probably wanted to do, just for, as an additional safety, is we actually want to loop through the list in reverse. So for this, we're going to go for each, it's the reverse for each loop. So it looks very similar. The only difference is we're going to loop through this list in reverse. So that way, if we do remove anything from the array, although technically we don't store it, it's not going to mess up the order or anything like that. As I said, it's not strictly necessary at this particular stage, but I'm going to do it anyway, just because it's good practice to get into. So I'm just going to come in and just swap that out. So now it's reverse for each loop. So with that change, it should function exactly the same. There's not going to be any differences there. So what I'm going to do now is just come and give myself a little bit more space. Now we're just going to need to think about how we want to do this. So there's kind of a few places where we actually use the GUID, and of course we do need to remove it as well. Now the issue we have is once we've actually destroyed it, we're not going to be able to get the GUID from the world item. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to unhook some of these, because we kind of want to move things about a little bit. We could probably, just unhook that as well. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to store a reference to the GUID for the current world item as a local variable. I'm just going to call that one current GUID. Again, you could name that anything you'd like. And I am just going to swap that out on the contain, so we use the stored version. And because we kind of do that, we can kind of come ahead and swap that out as well. So we may not actually need the should destroy, but we'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so we've done that. Now I'm going to pop that up onto the top branch instead. Move this up, and then on the sequence at the bottom, that's when we'll then remove the current GUID. Now the reason we want to do it, the reason we want to remove it after is because at this particular point, if it does contain the world data, then we kind of need to use it, and we can't do that if we've already destroyed it. So I'm going to come through here, and we can do the find on the world item data, and just as a reminder, that is the local variable version that we store here. And then we can break, and then we get access to some of that data. Now if you remember, we do store the loop world item, so we can get that. We can set the actor transform like so, and we can connect the transform up into it like so. And then the last thing we probably want to do is actually update the data that's on the item base class, because again it's going to be using the data that's set up when it's first added to the world, but some of that data may have changed for whatever reason. Chances are it's probably the same, but we do want to make sure we're covering all bases. So for that, we want to get the item so that's the item object, and then we want to set the apply serialized data, and then we can connect the item data from the world item data that was saved. So doing this, that should then reposition the world item and just update its data as well. So that should be it. So we'll just move this back up, save, compile, and now let's give it a quick test. So I'm just going to clear the save data again. So we'll wait for these to settle down a little bit. Okay, and then we save. Now if we load again, the items are now exactly where they were when we actually saved. Okay, so yeah, so back to past me. So there we go. That is how you can set up saving for your infantry system. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. I am super proud of you, because yeah, it's a lot. There is a lot of thought and little bits that has to go into actually setting up a save system. So well done for being determined and actually making it all the way to the end. Obviously, hopefully you found this video useful, and hopefully you've learned a lot about the process of saving. So yeah, just keep going. If you have enjoyed this video, do leave a like. Don't forget to subscribe. If you found the video helpful, I do have a Ko-Fi page as well if you'd like to support me. There's an option to do so on there. Again, I've got a Discord channel, so if you want to just talk shop, as they say, you know, show off what you've been working on, or you just need some help, by all means, do go ahead and jump on there. Also, I have Project Sunrise on the marketplace, so if you need an infantry system, not an infantry system, if you need an interaction system, a dialogue system, and a quest system, do go ahead and check that out. It's all blueprints, so you've got full control. You can have a look at that. So yeah, just want to say thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.